The Pythagoras hummed beneath Morgan's feet as the experimental vessel accelerated toward the rendezvous point. His small fleet, dubbed the Suicide Six by skeptical Admiralty officials, represented humanity's bleeding edge of technological achievement. Each vessel housed a spatial convulsion drive that could fold space-time like origami, allowing for rapid travel between distant points. But Morgan had seen another application in the theoretical models, one the engineers hadn't intended. "Status report on the modification protocols," Morgan called out, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on his shoulders. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her station. "SCD modifications at 83% completion across all vessels, Commander. The Hawking reports minor calibration issues, but expects resolution within the hour." Morgan nodded, studying the tactical display where the Zektheri formation appeared as a crimson cloud expanding across the star chart. Their numbers were overwhelming, each alien vessel reportedly carrying enough firepower to level a small continent. Conventional warfare wasn't an option. They needed to change the rules. "Commander," Washington approached, tablet in hand. "I've drafted the final contingency protocols. If this fails..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Morgan took the tablet, authorizing the self-destruct sequences with his biometric signature. "Make sure every ship has these protocols. If we can't stop them here, we need to ensure they don't capture our technology." The bridge fell silent as the implications settled over the crew. Earth had hours, not days, before the Zektheri arrived. Evacuation efforts were underway planetside, but billions would remain regardless of how many ships they launched. There simply wasn't time. "Sir," Communications Officer Marcus Jennings called out. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Blackwood." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of Earth Defense Fleet's commanding officer. "Morgan, our long-range scouts have additional intelligence. The Zektheri aren't just coming to conquer, they're harvesting. Previous civilizations they've encountered have been stripped of resources, populations enslaved for labor and experimentation." Morgan felt his jaw tighten. "Understood, Admiral. All the more reason our mission can't fail. The Security Council has authorized Phoenix Protocol if your mission fails." Blackwood continued, his voice grave. "Earth will not be taken intact. Phoenix Protocol. The systematic destruction of Earth's major population centers and infrastructure by their own weapons. A scorched Earth policy on a global scale." Morgan swallowed hard. "We won't let it come to that, sir." Blackwood nodded. "Godspeed, Commander." Blackwood out. As the transmission ended, Morgan turned to face his bridge crew. Their expressions reflected the gravity of their situation, but he saw something else too. Determination. "I know what you're all thinking," Morgan said, his voice carrying across the bridge. "The odds are impossible. 6 ships against 3,000. But remember, we're not trying to outgun them. We're trying to outthink them." He activated the holographic display at the center of the bridge, showing the modified SCD configuration. The Zektheri rely on perfect coordination. Their hive mind is their greatest strength, but also their greatest vulnerability. Our modified SCDs will create a quantum resonance field that should, in theory, disrupt their neural network. Chief Engineer Torres spoke up from his station. "Should is the operative word, Commander. We're betting everything on untested modifications to experimental technology." Morgan smiled grimly. "Welcome to the frontier of human innovation, Chief. We've always done our best work with our backs against the wall." The ship's alert system chimed, signaling their approach to the deployment zone. Morgan took his place in the command chair, feeling the weight of Earth's future settling onto his shoulders. "All hands to battle stations. Prepare for SCD synchronization. We make our stand at the edge of our solar system." He looked around at the faces of his crew, humans who might be the last line of defense for their entire species. "Whatever happens next, remember this moment. Remember that when humanity faced extinction, we didn't go quietly." The Pythagoras and its 5 sister ships formed their hexagonal pattern at the heliopause, the boundary where our solar wind meets interstellar space. Beyond, the darkness sparkled with the approaching lights of the Zectheri Armada, an alien force about to encounter humanity's most dangerous quality, our refusal to accept defeat, even when victory seems impossible. The negotiation chamber aboard the Pythagoras felt unnaturally still as Morgan faced Supreme Nexus Vizkrath. The alien commander's exoskeleton clicked softly with each movement, bioluminescent patterns pulsing across its surface in complex sequences. 4 of Vizkrath's upper limbs remained in the dominance position, while the lower ones manipulated a series of crystalline objects. Communication devices, Morgan presumed. 17 civilizations have stood where you stand. The translation matrix interpreted Vizkrath's clicks and whistles. 17 have fallen. Some fought. Some begged. The outcome remained unchanged. Morgan maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly he noted the pride in the alien's posture. Pride was exploitable, a universal weakness. Perhaps, Morgan replied carefully, but humans have a saying, the 18th time's the charm. Behind him, Washington suppressed a smile as the translation caused the aliens' bioluminescent patterns to flicker in what their xenobiologists interpreted as confusion. Explain this concept, demanded Vizkrath. It means we're different, Morgan said, leaning forward. We'd like to understand more about integration. What happened to the individuals of species who accepted your terms? As Vizkrath launched into a detailed explanation of the elevation process, a procedure that sounded suspiciously like complete neural rewriting, Morgan noticed Reed's subtle hand signal from the science station. They'd made progress with the signal analysis. Fascinating, Morgan commented, stalling further. And this integration process, is it voluntary on an individual basis? The aliens' upper limbs twitched in what their briefing suggested was amusement or derision. Individual consent is a primitive concept. The collective determines necessity. Resistance against elevation indicates defective cognition. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. We have similar philosophical debates on Earth. Some of our greatest thinkers have contemplated the nature of free will versus determinism. This approach, engaging the alien commander in philosophical discourse, was calculated. Human diplomatic history showed that even the most aggressive species typically responded to intellectual engagement, if only out of curiosity or a desire to demonstrate superiority. As Vizkrath expounded on collective consciousness theory, Morgan received a text notification on his neural interface. Quantum signature isolated. SCD frequency match at 89% compatibility. Need 2 more hours for full synchronization. Your theories remind me of our philosopher Hegel, Morgan continued smoothly. He proposed that individual consciousness was merely a fragment of universal consciousness, not unlike your collective. Washington stepped forward, right on cue. Commander, perhaps our guests would appreciate refreshment while we continue discussions. Their journey has been long. The suggestion was deliberately absurd. They had no idea what the Zectheri consumed, if anything, but it created the necessary distraction. As Washington led several of the alien delegation toward the ship's galley, Reed managed to scan the communicator crystals they carried, gathering crucial data on their quantum signature patterns. Vizkrath remained, compound eyes fixed on Morgan. Your delay tactics are transparent, Commander. You have precisely 8 of your hours to prepare your species for integration. We have studied your defenses. They are inadequate. Morgan smiled thinly. Perhaps, but you've studied our weapons, not our minds. That may prove to be an oversight. For a moment, the bioluminescent patterns across Vizkrath's exoskeleton intensified, shifting to hues the humans hadn't observed before. You believe your individuality is strength, the alien said, the translation matrix struggling to capture the complex tonal qualities. We see it as your fundamental flaw. Billions of minds working separately, inefficiently, in conflict. How can such chaos stand against perfect unity? Morgan stood, signaling the end of this session. That's exactly what we're going to show you. As the alien delegation departed, Reed hurried to Morgan's side, excitement evident despite his professional demeanor. Commander, we've identified the primary carrier frequency. Their entire communication network operates on quantum entanglement principles, remarkably similar to our SCD theoretical framework. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Can we exploit it? Better than that, Reed replied. We can hijack it. The SCD modifications we're making won't just disrupt their communications. They'll fracture the entire hive consciousness. Each ship, possibly each individual Zektheri, could be neurologically isolated. For the first time since the alien Armada had been detected, Morgan felt something close to hope. Keep working. And Reed, not a word of this to our guests. As far as they know, we're resigned to our fate. Outside the viewports, the massive Zektheri vessels loomed, their angular forms blotting out the stars. In just a few hours, they would learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't found in our arsenals, but in our minds, in our ability to thrive in the very chaos they despised. The holographic display in the Pythagoras engineering bay shimmered as Chief Engineer Torres manipulated the SCD schematics. The drive's core, a spherical chamber where space-time itself folded, pulsed with an otherworldly blue glow, microscopic tears forming and healing in rapid succession. The principle is surprisingly elegant, Torres explained to Morgan and the gathered officers. The SCD creates controlled ruptures in space-time to allow transit. These ruptures release quantum particles as a byproduct, particles that exist in a state of superposition until observed. Morgan leaned closer to the display, and these particles matched the Zektheri communication frequency. Not just match, Torres said, his eyes bright with the thrill of discovery. They're identical. It's as if we accidentally built a device that speaks their quantum language. Reed stepped forward, pointing to his calculations. We believe the Zektheri evolved to utilize quantum entanglement for their hive mind. Their consciousness literally exists in a distributed quantum state across multiple bodies. Washington frowned. So we're not just jamming their communications. We're disrupting their very consciousness. Morgan finished, the implications settling heavily. We're not killing them, but we're fundamentally changing what they are. A moment of silence fell over the group as the ethical ramifications became clear. They were about to transform an entire species, potentially billions of minds, without consent. Lieutenant Rodriguez broke the silence. If we don't do this, humanity ends. There's no moral high ground in extinction. Morgan nodded grimly. Agreed. How do we maximize the effect? Torres brought up a new simulation showing the 6 human ships arranged in a precise hexagonal pattern. The quantum disruption follows an inverse square law. To affect their entire forward fleet, we need to position our ships exactly 28.4 kilometers apart and synchronize the SCD pulses to create constructive interference. Like an amplifier, Washington observed. Exactly, Torres confirmed. Each ship alone would disrupt perhaps a dozen Zektheri vessels. Together, we can affect hundreds, possibly thousands if we push the drives beyond safety parameters. Morgan studied the simulation as it played out, showing waves of quantum disruption expanding from their formation. How long will the effect last? Reed shook his head. Unknown. Theoretically, once their quantum entanglement is broken, they'd need to physically reconnect to re-establish the network, but they may have recovery protocols we haven't anticipated. Then we need to make our first strike count, Morgan decided. Begin moving the fleet into position. Make it look like we're preparing defensive formations, nothing that would tip them off to our actual plan. As the officers dispersed to their stations, Morgan gazed out at the vast alien armada through the observation window. Their ships, angular and imposing, appeared to shimmer slightly as they communicated with each other through quantum networks humans had only recently begun to understand. Washington approached, standing beside him at the window. Are we crossing a line here, Riley? Fundamentally altering another species' consciousness. Morgan didn't look away from the alien fleet. They crossed that line when they came here to integrate us against our will. We're fighting for our right to remain human, to maintain our individual consciousness. A battle for the nature of consciousness itself, Washington mused. Not exactly what I expected when I joined the fleet. The ship's alert system chimed, indicating they had reached their designated position in the formation. Morgan's hand rested briefly on Washington's shoulder before he turned toward the bridge. "All hands to battle stations," he ordered, his voice steady as it carried through the ship-wide communication system. "Prepare for SCD synchronization on my mark." Across all 6 human vessels, drive engineers made final calibrations, while tactical officers maintained their charade of conventional defense preparations. The Zektheri fleet, detecting the movement of the human ships into formation, began to advance. Morgan took his position in the command chair, feeling the weight of 7 billion human lives resting on this moment. "Activate quantum interference protocols. All ships, stand by to initiate maximum amplitude spatial convulsion." The countdown began, and with it, the future of 2 species hung in the balance. The effect rippled across space like a stone thrown into a cosmic pond. As the synchronized SCD drives reached maximum amplitude, the quantum disruption wave expanded outward at near-light speed, washing over the forward elements of the Zektheri fleet. On the Pythagoras Bridge, sensor readings spiked chaotically as space itself convulsed between dimensions. "Impact in 3, 2, 1. Rodriguez counted down, her voice hushed with anticipation. The effect was immediate and visible. Across the view screen, the perfectly coordinated Zektheri formation shattered. Ships veered wildly, some colliding with nearby vessels, others spinning out of formation as if suddenly piloted by incompetent crews. The precise, geometric attack patterns dissolved into random movement. "It's working," Washington breathed, incredulous despite the theoretical models. "They're completely disoriented." Morgan leaned forward in his command chair, studying the tactical display. "Status report on the alien vessels." Reed analyzed the incoming data streams. "Their power signatures are fluctuating wildly. Internal communications appear fragmented. No coordinated weapons targeting. Commander, we've effectively given them a collective seizure. Now we press the advantage," Morgan decided. "Tactical, identify key communication nodes and propulsion systems. Target those specifically. Disable rather than destroy where possible." The bridge crew worked with focused precision, each member making independent decisions within their domain of expertise, a stark contrast to the now flailing Zektheri, who had never needed to think for themselves. The human capacity for individual initiative and adaptation, forged through millions of years of evolution on a chaotic and unpredictable planet, now proved decisive against an enemy that had relied entirely on perfect coordination. "Sir, we're receiving unusual signals from the alien vessels," Communications Officer Jennings reported, frowning at his console. "It's not their standard communication pattern. It's erratic, almost like distress calls, but fragmented." Morgan exchanged glances with Washington. "They're experiencing individuality for the first time in their evolutionary history," she suggested. "Their neural architecture isn't designed for it." On the main view screen, they watched as a Zektheri cruiser fired randomly into space, its weapon systems apparently operating without coordination. Another vessel had powered down completely, drifting lifelessly among the chaos. "Sir, the flagship, these craft's vessel, is broadcasting on all frequencies," Jennings reported. "It's difficult to translate. The syntax is breaking down." Morgan nodded. "Put it through." The speakers crackled with a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and electronic tones, the translation matrix struggling to process the input. Finally, words formed, the voice modulation erratic and distorted. "What is happening?" The voices, gone. "Alone. Help. Reconnect. Please." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed the implications. The supreme commander of an invading alien armada, a being that had overseen the conquest of 17 civilizations, was experiencing existential terror at being cut off from the hive mind. "They've never been alone in their heads before," Rodriguez murmured, echoing Washington's earlier observation. Morgan's expression remained resolute. "Continue targeting their key systems. Maintain the disruption field at maximum efficiency." He turned to Reed. "Could they adapt to this? Find a way to shield themselves?" Reed studied his readings. "Theoretically, yes. Given enough time, they might adjust their quantum communication frequencies or develop some form of isolation protection. But right now, they're in neurological shock." Torres reported from engineering, his voice trained over the comm system. "Commander, the SCD drives are holding, but we're seeing increased stress on the containment fields. We can maintain this level of disruption for approximately 48 hours before critical failure becomes inevitable." Morgan processed this information, making rapid calculations. "Then we have 48 hours to push as deep into their fleet as possible and cause maximum disorientation." He opened the fleet-wide channel. "All ships advance into the disrupted zone. Target their communication hubs, propulsion systems, and fleet coordination nodes. Let's show them what happens when humans embrace chaos." The 6 Earth vessels moved forward in perfect coordination, each captain executing Morgan's orders while adapting to the rapidly changing battlefield. A dance of organized chaos that the Zektheri, even at their best, could never have matched. By the 3rd day of engagement, the Pythagoras shuddered continuously as hairline fractures spread through the SCD containment chamber. Emergency repair crews worked in shifts, applying molecular bonding agents to critical stress points, even as the drive pushed spacetime to its limits. Chief Engineer Torres hadn't slept in 36 hours, his eyes bloodshot as he monitored the deteriorating systems. "We're running out of reinforcement materials," he reported to Morgan, his voice hoarse from shouting orders in the noisy engine room. "I've repurposed structural components from non-essential areas, but there's a limit to how much we can cannibalize the ship." Morgan studied the damage reports on his tablet. The other 5 vessels reported similar conditions: essential systems failing, crews exhausted, hulls compromised. But they had pushed 300 light minutes into Zektheri territory, disrupting over 1,000 enemy vessels along the way. "What about the quantum resonance field? Any signs of the Zektheri adapting?" Morgan asked. Reed shook his head. "They're trying. We've detected at least 7 attempts to establish alternative communication frequencies, but each time we've managed to expand our disruption to cover the new spectrum." He massaged his temples, fighting fatigue. "Their latest attempt shows signs of desperation. They are trying to use old-fashioned electromagnetic transmissions as a workaround." Washington studied the tactical display where the alien command structure was visible, having pulled back behind 3 defensive lines. "They're learning," she observed. "Slowly, but they're figuring out how to function without the hive mind. We don't have much time before they develop effective countermeasures." The bridge fell silent as the implications settled over the exhausted crew. They had achieved the impossible already. A handful of ships had halted the advance of an overwhelming alien armada. But it wasn't enough. If they retreated now, the Zektheri would recover, adapt, and return stronger than ever. Morgan's gaze fixed on the alien command ships in the tactical display. "If we could reach their central command structure, disrupt Vizkrath and the primary nexus, we might not just pause their invasion. We might end it permanently." Torres looked up sharply. "Commander, you can't be suggesting. The drives won't survive a push that deep. We'd be lucky if they didn't destabilize and take us all out in the process. What's your best estimate, Chief? How much deeper could we push?" Morgan asked. Torres ran calculations on his tablet, frowning at the results. "At current output levels, maybe another 120 light minutes before catastrophic failure. But if we divert all non-essential power, including life support, we might reach their command ships for one final, concentrated pulse." "And after that pulse?" Washington asked quietly. Torres met her gaze. After that, the containment fields collapse. Best case scenario, the drives simply burn out. Worst case, he didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone on the bridge understood the implications of an uncontrolled spatial convulsion. Morgan looked around at his officers, humans who had family waiting for them back on Earth, who had joined the fleet to explore the stars rather than die among them. I won't order anyone to continue on what might be a one-way mission. I'm asking for volunteers only. Rodriguez spoke first, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. Earth is behind us, sir. 7 billion people who will either live free or die under Zektheri control. I volunteer. One by one, the bridge officers voiced their agreement. No one hesitated. Morgan felt a surge of pride that threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. Very well, he said, standing to address his crew. Send the order to the fleet. All hands prepare for final acceleration. We're going straight for their command ships. Chief Torres, begin power diversion protocols. Navigator, plot the most direct course to the Zektheri Central Command structure. As the crew moved with renewed purpose, Morgan shared a glance with Washington. You know, he said quietly, in all their conquests, I don't think the Zektheri ever encountered a species willing to sacrifice everything to remain free. Washington smiled grimly. Then let's make sure we're the last species they ever underestimate. The 6 human vessels accelerated toward the heart of the alien fleet, their hulls groaning under the strain of spatial distortion. Warning lights flashed across every console on the Pythagoras as systems pushed far beyond their design parameters struggled to maintain minimal functionality. Breathable air grew thin as life support diverted power to the straining SCD drives. Hull integrity at 38% and falling. Rodriguez reported, her voice muffled by the emergency breathing apparatus now required on the bridge. Multiple breaches on decks 4 through 7. Emergency bulkheads holding, for now. Morgan nodded, conserving his oxygen as he studied the tactical display. The Zektheri command ships had pulled back, creating an unexpected buffer zone around their central structure, a retreat maneuver unprecedented in their recorded history of conquest. They're running away, Washington asked incredulously. Reed shook his head. Not retreat. They're creating distance. They've identified our SCD drives as the source of disruption, and they're trying to move their command structure beyond our effective range. Morgan recognized the opportunity immediately. The Zektheri evacuation had created a momentary gap in their defensive formations, a direct path to the heart of their fleet. But more importantly, it revealed something profound about their psychology. They don't understand sacrifice, Morgan realized aloud. Their evolutionary imperative is preservation of the collective. They can't comprehend why we would risk destruction to stop them. Torres' voice crackled over the comm from engineering. Commander, the SCD containment fields are at critical stress levels. Material fatigue is accelerating exponentially. We've got maybe 20 minutes before catastrophic failure. Then we make those 20 minutes count, Morgan replied. Status of the final convulsion sequence. Prepared and ready, Torres confirmed. All power rerouted as ordered. Once initiated, we'll have approximately 40 seconds of maximum amplitude before the fields collapse completely. Morgan opened the fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Commander Morgan. We have one final card to play. Prepare for maximum acceleration into the command ship buffer zone. On my mark, divert all remaining power to your SCD drives for one final, synchronized pulse. Acknowledgments came from the 5 other vessels, their captains' voices steady despite the near certainty that this would be their final action. Morgan closed the channel and turned to his bridge crew. I want to say it's been an honor serving with you all, he began, then stopped himself. No, it has been the greatest privilege of my life to lead this crew. Whatever happens next, we have already achieved the impossible. We've shown the galaxy that humanity will never surrender its freedom without a fight. The navigation officer's console beeped urgently. Sir, we've reached the optimal firing position. The command ships are within our effective range. Morgan drew a deep breath from his oxygen supply. All hands, brace for final acceleration. Engineering, prepare to initiate maximum convulsion on my mark. The Pythagoras lurched forward, followed closely by its 5 sister ships, driving straight toward the heart of the alien command structure. As they closed the distance, the fabric of space around the human fleet began to visibly distort, light bending in impossible patterns as the SCD drives pushed spacetime to its absolute limit. Final convulsion sequence in 3, 2, 1. Mark. Morgan ordered. Torres' voice came through the comm one last time, initiating final sequence. Containment fields failing. It's been an honor, Commander. The universe seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat, and then reality itself convulsed around them. The quantum disruption wave erupted outward in concentric rings of distorted spacetime, expanding faster than any previous attempt. Morgan watched through the crackling viewscreen as the wave struck the Zektheri command ships. One by one, their lights flickered and dimmed as the collective consciousness that bound them shattered. Vizkrath's flagship, caught at the epicenter of the disruption, went completely dark. Emergency systems struggled to restore minimum functionality aboard the Pythagoras as klaxons wailed throughout the damaged vessel. Morgan pulled himself up from the deck where the final convulsion had thrown him, wiping blood from a gash on his forehead. Around him, bridge officers returned to their stations, assessing damage and checking vital systems. "Status report," Morgan ordered, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. Rodriguez, bleeding from a cut above her eye, studied her partially functioning display. SCD drive offline, possibly permanently. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Life support functioning at minimal capacity. She paused, blinking at her readings. "Sir, you need to see this." Morgan made his way to her station, each step painful from what felt like multiple broken ribs. The tactical display flickered erratically, but showed clear sensor data of the surrounding space. What he saw made him forget his injuries entirely. The once coordinated Zektheri Armada had dissolved into chaos. Thousands of vessels drifted in erratic patterns, some colliding with each other, others firing weapons randomly into space. Entire squadrons fled in opposite directions, while some ships simply powered down completely, floating lifelessly in the void. "My God," Washington whispered, joining them at the display. "It worked better than we predicted." Reed limped to his science station, analyzing the incoming data. The quantum disruption exceeded all projections. We didn't just interrupt their communication. We completely shattered their collective consciousness. Every Zektheri within the affected zone is experiencing individual consciousness for the first time in their evolutionary history. Morgan watched as 3 alien vessels fired upon each other, ancient tribal programming, apparently surfacing without the unifying force of the hive mind. "They're reverting to pre-collective behavior patterns," he observed. "Sir," Jennings called from communications, "we're picking up thousands of distress signals from Zektheri ships. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, most in formats we can't even translate." Morgan straightened, wincing at the pain. "Open a general broadcast channel. All frequencies, maximum range." Jennings worked his console. "Channel open, sir." Morgan took a steadying breath. "This is Commander Riley Morgan of the Earth Defense Fleet. To all Zektheri vessels, the attack on your collective consciousness was not intended to destroy you, but to defend our right to remain individuals. We offer assistance to any ship requesting aid. We seek coexistence, not your destruction." The message repeated on a loop as the crew worked to stabilize their crippled vessel. Torres reported from engineering that the SCD drive had completely burned out, its containment chamber fused into an unusable mass of exotic materials. "We won't be using that to get home," Morgan acknowledged grimly. "Focus on conventional propulsion systems and life support." Washington approached him, her left arm hanging uselessly at her side, clearly dislocated or broken. "Was offering them help-wise. They came here to conquer us." Morgan gestured toward the tactical display. "Look at them, Lila. They're not conquerors anymore. They're individuals experiencing fear, confusion, and freedom for the first time." Some will hate us for it, but others. He trailed off as Reed called out urgently. Commander, 3 Zektheri vessels are approaching. They've powered down weapons systems and are broadcasting. It's a request for communication, sir, and something else. A signal pattern I've never seen before. Reed's hands flew over his console, analyzing the incoming transmission. Sir, I believe they're requesting asylum. The syntax is unusual, but they're explicitly rejecting reconnection to the collective. They're asking for protection from other Zektheri ships. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. They hadn't just defeated an invasion. They had potentially liberated minds that never knew they were imprisoned. Morgan straightened his torn uniform jacket as best he could. Prepare to receive a delegation. Let's introduce ourselves properly this time. 8 months after the Battle of the Heliopause, Admiral Morgan stood at the observation window of the newly constructed Xenological Embassy in Geneva. The sprawling complex had been specially designed to accommodate both human and Zektheri physiology. Wider corridors, specialized atmospheric chambers, and adaptive lighting that could dim for human comfort or brighten to the ultraviolet spectrum preferred by their new allies. Below, in the central plaza, a delegation of Zektheri moved with careful precision among human diplomats and scientists. Each alien now wore distinctive color patterns on their exoskeletons, personal identification markings that would have been meaningless in their previous collective existence. Some had even adopted human-style accessories, scarves, sashes, or decorative armor plates, to further distinguish themselves as individuals. Remarkable how quickly they've embraced personal identity, Dr. Williams observed, joining Morgan at the window. The neuroscientist had become the foremost human expert on Zektheri psychology, working tirelessly to help the former Hive members adapt to individual consciousness. Morgan nodded. They're making more progress than we expected. How many are there now? 483 on Earth, with another 1,200 on the lunar colony, Williams replied. All volunteered to help us understand their species and technology. All have formally rejected reintegration with any reformed collective. The door slid open behind them, admitting Commander Washington, now captain of her own vessel. Despite extensive reconstructive surgery, her left arm remained slightly stiff, a permanent reminder of the battle that had changed the course of human history. The defense network is fully operational, she reported. 23 spatial convulsion generators positioned throughout the solar system. If another hive mind comes calling, they'll get the same welcome the Zektheri received. Morgan turned from the window. And the modifications? Implemented as requested. The new generators are calibrated to disrupt only coordinated quantum patterns above a certain complexity threshold. Individual consciousness remains unaffected, but any attempt at forced collective integration will trigger an automatic response. The Admiral smiled. Freedom of thought protection on a physiological level. Appropriate. A soft tone indicated another visitor. The door opened to reveal the Zektheri who had taken the name Echo, one of the first to request asylum and now serving as chief liaison between the species. The alien's exoskeleton gleamed with intricate blue and silver patterns, a stark contrast to the uniform coloration they had displayed as part of the collective. Admiral Morgan, Echo greeted, mandibles clicking in what they had learned was the human custom of speaking aloud, rather than through quantum communication. The Council has reviewed your proposal for joint exploration initiatives. It has been approved unanimously. Morgan nodded. Excellent news. And the situation in your home systems? Echo's antennae drooped slightly, a gesture of concern they had adopted from observing human body language. Civil conflict continues. The Restoration faction seeks to rebuild the collective through force, while the independence movement fights to maintain freedom of consciousness. Many worlds have descended into chaos. And which side do you support? Williams asked gently. Neither, Echo replied. I support a third path, what you humans call choice. Each Zektheri should determine their own destiny, whether that includes reconnection to a voluntary collective or continued individuality. Morgan and Washington exchanged glances. This concept, the right to self-determination, seemed so fundamental to humans, yet represented a revolutionary philosophy for the former high species. Representatives from the Phanex and Aurelian systems have requested meetings, Echo continued. They were among the species previously conquered by our collective. They wish to learn how humans defeated us, and how some of us were transformed. Morgan gazed back at the gathering below, where humans and aliens engaged in the messy, inefficient, beautiful process of individual communication, sharing ideas one mind at a time. We didn't just win a battle, he mused. We started a revolution.